Hi, everybody. This is the podcast, Everything About Hockey. This podcast, I thought I'd have a little bit more fun. I thought I'd come up with a list for the 30 teams, the players of the all-time for each franchise. I want to pick 3 forwards, 2 defensemen, and a goaltender. Now, the forwards, I'm not going to worry about center, left wing, right wing. I'm going to just pick the top 3 forwards I think played for that particular franchise at that particular time. Now, the 2 franchises I'm not going to deal with is Seattle and Las Vegas because both those are 2 new teams. So I'm going to stick with the 30, I guess I call them 30 original teams, and see what happens there. The first one is the Boston Bruins. The forwards are obvious. Bergman, Phil Esposito, and Cam Neely. I'll get details in both those, all 3 of those guys, but they're obvious choices. I mean, I don't have to really talk to anybody and why they should be in their all-franchise teams. Okay, the first person I'm going to talk about is Phil Esposito. Okay, he played from 1967 to 1975. His goals were 459, his assists were 553, and he had a total of 1,012 points. He was a 5-time scoring title, and he had 2 Hart trophies. Do I need to say any more? Okay, then, he won 6 Rocket Richards. Let's go on to the next one. I'm going to go with Cam Neely next because this guy had a great capability of doing physical presence and pure skill combined into one player. He played for the Bruins from 1986 to 1996. He scored 344 goals, 246 assists, 590 points. Now, I know there's a lot of Bruins forwards out there that did an unbelievable job, but I'm going to go with the guy just retired, Patrick Bergeron. This guy was unbelievable. His face-offs, it was a given he'd win a face-off. It was a given that he'd actually motivate this team to be an elite team. This guy was a pure leader and an elite center iceman. He just retired, and he's going to be missed because I enjoyed watching him, even though I don't like the Bruins. I enjoy watching him because of his pure skill and leadership capabilities. Okay, well, let's look at the blue line. Now, the first one, obvious, Bobby Orr. This guy led the league in scoring twice. He had 17 Hart trophies. He had 3 Norris, and he also had a Calder Cup as Rookie of the Year. He really defined how an offensive defenseman would come into play. Before that, no really defenseman would move past the red line until he came in aboard and really became a true, not only a defensive defenseman, but an offensive defenseman that can score goals just like a forward could. He's a Hall of Famer that changed the game. Then the other one guy I'm going to go with is Raymond Bourque, another elite Hall of Fame defenseman. Now, he didn't win his cup in Boston. He won the cup in Colorado, which I kind of was, a little upset about. I wanted him to win a cup in Boston really badly. But Raymond Bourque's stats were unbelievable. His goals were 395. His assists was 1,111. And his total points is 1,506. Now, my goaltending is a kind of a controversial pick because he did create a few waves, but his stats are unbelievable, and what he accomplished as a Bruin was unbelievable. He played from 2002 to 2003, and they also played from 2005 to 2012. His record was 196 wins, 121 losses, and 45 ties. His goals against average was 2.48, and his save percentage is .921. He played 6 seasons for the Bruins. He won 2 Vezinas, a Conn Smythe, and a Stanley Cup. And I'm sure there's players that you prefer over than what I picked for these spots. But this is just my opinion of the all-time Bruins list, because this is actually an original 6 franchise that has a tremendous history. The next team I want to talk about is the Buffalo Sabres, a team that also had a pretty interesting history itself. The first person I'm going to look at is Joël Perreault. He was a dominating hockey player back in the 70s and 80s for the Buffalo Sabres. He was a gifted playmaking center iceman that centered the French Connection line, the old Buffalo Sabres French Connection line, back in the 70s and 80s. He actually played for the Buffalo Sabres from 1970 to 1987. His Sabre stats for that time were he scored 512 goals. He had 114 assists for a total of 1,326 total points. He went to the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1990, but unfortunately, he only made one appearance in the Cup Finals in 1975, and the Sabres lost at that Cup Finals. But I still think he was the most gifted Buffalo Sabres to ever put on the Sabre uniform. Now I'm going to go with the other player that actually I'm going to pick as one of my forwards is Rick Martin. Now, he actually broke Jobert's rookie scoring record back in 1971. Unfortunately, knee injuries really sidetracked his career and ended his career, but he was a unbelievable scorer. He actually scored 50 goals twice in his career. Now, his numbers aren't unbelievably impressive, but like I said, injuries really shortened his career. But he was a vital part of that French Connection line back in the 1970s. His goals his career goals were 382. His assists were 313. His total points were 669 points. Not exactly super dominant, but if injuries wouldn't have killed his career, he would have been definitely a Hall of Famer. He played for the Sabres from 1971 to 1981. It was only 10 years he played for that Sabres. The last forward I'm going to pick for the Buffalo Sabres was Alexander Mogilny. And the reason why was in 1989, he defected from the Red Army team to play in the NHL. It really was a groundbreaking event that took place. And I think that if he wouldn't have done that, he probably wouldn't have actually had so many other Russians come over and play in the NHL. Now, in interviews, he said he really didn't do it for a political statement. He just wanted to play in the NHL. But it still, in my opinion, was groundbreaking. In 1989 to 1995, he played for the Sabres. He scored 212 goals. He got 233 assists for 444 points. He was a sniper. He was a quick sniper. Once he got going, he went from 1 to 10 in about 2 seconds. And he could handle that puck at 10 or 11, no problem. So that's my forwards for the Buffalo Sabres. I know there's going to be some controversy, especially with that last pick. But that's my opinion of those. Now let's go with the blue liners. The defense, I think they're all-time blue liners for the Buffalo Sabres. The first guy I'm going to pick is a Hall of Famer, Phil Housley. He wasn't the biggest guy on the ice, but boy, he could handle the puck, and he was ahead of his time when it came to offensive defensemen. He actually scored 178 goals. He had 380 assists for 558 points. He played for the Sabres from 1982 to 1990. The other blue line I'm going to pick is Mike Ramsey. I just always like watching this guy play. He played for the Buffalo Sabres from 1979 to 1993. He scored 73 points. He got 420 assists for a total of 672 points. The defensive side is where he really dominated. He actually got nominated several times for a Selke Trophy, and he actually got a Selke Trophy once. The next person I'm going to go with is the goaltending, and obviously Dominic Hasek. This guy was an incredible goaltender. He would flop around. His legs would kick out. His arms would fly out. He would just be all over the place. But yet he'd still make an unbelievable save. And save, and save, and save. Nobody could get by this guy. It was incredible. He played for the Buffalo Sabres from 1992 to 2001. His record was 235 wins. It was 170 losses and 77 ties. His career goals against average was 2.22. And his save percentage for his career was .926. But, it was how he stopped the puck. It was incredible. Unfortunately, he never did win a Stanley Cup for Buffalo Sabres, but it was fun watching him play. He did lead them to a Cup Finals in 1999, but they lost to the Dallas Stars. Now, the next team I'm going to go with, the all-star, all-time team list, is the Carolina Hurricanes. But I'm also going to add the Hartford Whalers history into this one because they originally were the Hartford Whalers, but they moved to Carolina. So let's go ahead and start looking, seeing what the players I picked for this. The first one I'm going to pick is, for the forwards, is Ron Francis. Okay, he first played for the Hartford Whalers from 1981 to 1991. Then he came back in 1998 and played again until 2004. His total goals that is his career with this franchise was 382 goals. His assists were 793. His total points was 1,175. He was basically the heart and soul of the Hartford Whalers back when they were playing in Hartford. He was the captain and the leader of this team. That's why I'm going to go with him first. Now let's look at the next forward I'm going to pick for the Carolina/Hartford franchise. The next person I'm going to go with is Rob Brindamore. Now this guy, not only was he a solid offensive forward, but he was a dominating defensive forward. He was probably one of the top defensive forwards in NHL history. He played for the Hurricanes from 2000 to 2010. He got 174 goals, 299 assists for a total of 473 points. He was really the guy that led the Hurricanes to their Stanley Cup in 2006. Now, the last person I'm going to go with is an obvious choice. I have to put him on the list for the top three forwards of all time for the franchise Carolina Hartford. Yeah, that's Kevin Dineen. He played for the franchise from 1984 to 1991. Then he came back in 1995 and played till 1999. He scored 250 goals. He had 294 assists for a total of 544 points. He scored over 40 goals twice in his career with this franchise. He also got a Calder Cup and a Hart Trophy vote. When this team was in Hartford, he was the actual top gun for the Hartford Whalers when he was playing for them. Okay, now let's look at the defenseman. The guy I think that should be on this list is Glenn Wesley. Now, he actually led the Hurricanes on the back end to their 2006 Stanley Cup win. He was a top pairing anchor on that blue line. He played for him from 1994 to 2008. He scored 51 goals, 176 assists for 227 points. He was one of those guys that actually started out in Hartford and actually moved to Carolina when they moved to Carolina. So he was kind of the anchor for not only the Hartford team, but also for the Carolina team too, that did win that cup. The other guy I'm going to pick is Dougie Hamilton. He was another one of those top pairing defensemen that could do everything at a really high skill level. He could play solid defense. He could play solid offense. He could anchor the power play. He could get penalties for him. Okay, the goaltender. Now, they wouldn't have won a Stanley Cup in 2006 without this guy, Cam Ward. I mean, he was the backbone of that cup run. He was the kind of guy that wasn't overly dominant, but he never made mistakes. He never gave up the soft goal when they needed it. Now, let's look at the next team, and that's the Columbus Blue Jackets. Now, this team has had some ups and downs to it, but the three forwards I'm going to pick, obviously the first one's Rick Nash. He played from 2002 to 2012. He scored 289 goals, 256 assists, for a total of 571 points. He was the face of that franchise in the early part. He really stepped in and really promoted the franchise in its early years. And also, he's the only guy that had his number retired in Columbus. He was an elite level power forward. Now let's look at the next guy, which is Panaris. He actually only played 2 seasons for the Columbus Blue Jackets, but he averaged over a point a game both seasons. He was an unbelievable talent. He could drive the play from the left side. He scored 55 goals. He had 114 assists for a total of 167 points from 2017 to 2019. Those actually were the most two successful teams the Blue Jackets ever had when it came to the playoffs. And then the last person I'm going to pick for these three forwards for the all-time Blue Jacket teams is Boone Jenner. He right now is the present face of the franchise. He's played the most games in Blue Jacket history. And he's also now the really heart and soul of this team as they go through a rebuild. Now let's look at the two defensemen for the all-time defensemen. First one is Zach Lewinsky. He's actually got the most points for a blue liner in Jackets history. And he really is anchoring the blue line. He can play offense. He can play defense. He can run the power play. He can kill penalties. Right now, he's the heart and soul of that blue line. Next one is going to be Fedor Tutin. Now, he was one of the original Blue Jackets. He came in Columbus from 2008 to 2016. He scored 38 goals, 146 assists for 185 points. He was originally the number one defenseman. And some bad teams, if he had actually was in a better situation, he'd be more noted. But he was really a good, solid defenseman for the Jackets back in the early years. And, of course, my goaltender is Sergei Bobrovsky, two-time Vezina Trophy winner for the Jackets. He was also anchored one of the most successful playoff runs they've had as a Blue Jacket. He was a dominating goaltender at his time. He was just a fun person to watch. His quickness and his positioning was stellar. The next team I'm going to look at is the Florida Panthers. First person I'm going to look at is Alexander Barkov. He's a big, strong center iceman playing for the team right now. He really is the person that drives the offense for the Florida Panthers. The next person was a really fun person to watch. I'm talking about Pavel Bure. He played for the Panthers from 1999 to 2001. During that time frame, he had 152 goals, 99 assists, for a total of 251 points. He was just a pure offensive forward. He had one heck of a shot. Actually, he won the Rocket Richard twice, in 2000 and 2001, which is a trophy the NHL gives out for the top scorer. The last person I'm going to go with is Scott Mellanby. He played for the Panthers from 1993 to 2001. And what's cool about this guy was he created the rat trick. He killed a rat before the game in the locker room. They went out and scored 2 goals. And during the post-game interview, he claimed he got a rat trick. And then the 1996 run to the Cup Finals against Colorado, that's when they all started carrying rats, actually plastic rats. And when the Panthers scored, they'd throw rats on the ice. Now let's look at the blue line. First person I'm going to look at is Robert Spala. I think he should be on this all-time team for the Florida Panthers. He played for the Florida Panthers from 1996 to 2002. He was really an anchor on that Cup run, that 1996 Cup run. He was a solid top-pairing, stay-at-home defenseman. The other defenseman I'm going to pick is Aaron Ekblad. He was basically an all-around defenseman. He had size, strength. He was unbelievable in the defensive zone, and he also could pitch in a goal here and there. He was basically drafted by the Islanders, but he basically spent most of his time in the Florida Panthers sweater. His stats for the Florida Panthers were he had 294 wins, 144 losses, and 66 ties. His goal against average was 2.59, and his save percentage was .92. And the reason why I'm putting him on this list is he could single-handedly win a game for you. And he did it repeatedly with the Florida Panthers. The next team I'm going to talk about is the Detroit Red Wings. Another one of those original 6 teams with tremendous amount of history. First person I'm going to talk about is Gordie Howe. He obviously would make the list of the Red Wings all-time list. He's a Hockey Hall of Famer. He was basically Mr. Hockey for all those years. He played for Detroit starting in 1947 and retired in 1971. He scored 786 goals. Assists was 1,000, 223. Total points were 1,809. I mean, you got to put this guy in there. He had 12 Hart trophies as valuable player in the league. He had 4 Stanley Cups, and he was a first-time Hall of Famer when he got inducted in 1972. The next one is Ted Lindsley. He was a Red Wing from 1944 to 1965. During that time frame, he scored 335 goals. He scored 393 assists for a total of 728 points. He was voted most valuable player once. He's got 4 Stanley Cups. And he was inducted in the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1966. Then the last one I'm going to go with is Steve Yzerman. He really drove this team, led it. He actually learned how to play a complete game. When he first drafted, he was an offensive-minded forward, and he learned how to play defense and made all the difference. And he was one of the main reasons why the Red Wings won all those Stanley Cups back in the late 90s, early 2000s. First on the blue line, I'm going to go with Red Kelly. He wore the wing wheel from 1947 to 1960. He scored 162 goals, got 310 assists for a total of 472 points. He anchored this blue line to win 4 Stanley Cups in the 1950s. The interesting part about him that I'm going to point out is before becoming one of the top great two-way center icemen in Toronto, he was a stud defenseman in Detroit. He actually got the first Defenseman of the Year award, the Norris Trophy, in 1954. And of course, the other obvious defenseman I'm going to pick for his all-time Red Wings blue line be Nicholas Lidstrom. He played for the Red Wings from 1991 to 2012. He scored 264 goals. He had 878 assists for a total of 1,142 points. He got a whopping 8 Norris trophies as best defenseman of the year. He got 4 Stanley Cups, and he was in the Hockey Hall of Fame. He honored in 2015. He was the Detroit's number 1 defenseman in all those cups. All that offense went through him. He's the one that set it up. For goal, I'm going to go with Terry Sawchuk, one of the finest goaltenders the NHL has ever seen. He was unbelievable. He played for the Wings from 1915 to 1969. He had 351 wins, 243 losses, and 232 ties. His career goal against average is .244. He won the Calder as a rookie. He got 5 Vezinas as goaltender of the year. He got 4 Stanley Cups, and he also was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1971. So the Wings has a pretty impressive all-time list. Like I said, if you want to, on my YouTube channel, you can go down and tell me what you think of these lists. Of course, the next team up is the Montreal Canadiens, and this team is unbelievably talented with pure Hall of Famers. The original 6. First, I'm going to go with John Beliveau. Then we're going to go with Rocket Richard, and then Guy Lafleur. First, let's talk about Rocket Richard. This is the guy that actually set a standard of 50 goals in 50 games, which is something that all scoring forwards try to live up to. From 1942 to 1960, he was the NHL's elite scorer. He had 8 Stanley Cups, and he was introduced into the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1961. The next one is John Beliveau. From 1950 to 1971, he was the elite scorer for the NHL. He's won 10 Stanley Cups, and of course, naturally, he won multiple Hart trophies and Art Ross trophies, and he was also a Hockey Hall of Famer. He was inducted in 1972. Then the last one for the Habs is obviously going to be Guy Lafleur. He won multiple Hart trophies and Art Ross. He also won 5 Stanley Cups. He played for the Habs from 1971 to 1985. He also was in the Hockey Hall of Fame too, inducted in 1988. Now, of course, on this all-star, all-time team for the Habs, I'm going to anchor with a couple more Hall of Famers on the blue line, Larry Robinson and Doug Harvey. Then at goal, obviously, I'm going to pick Patrick Waugh, came in as a young guy for the Habs that led them to a Stanley Cup. The reason why I'm picking him is because he kind of created the butterfly-style goaltending that now is all over the NHL. He's kind of like the father of that style that really dominated the league back in the 90s and the 2000s and still carry it over now. I'm going to have to admit, this all-time Habs team was an easy team to pick. Let's go to the next one, New Jersey Devils. First person I'm going to go with Bobby Lee. From 92 to 2008, he won a few Stanley Cups for him. But he also, he wasn't a really dominating forward, an elite scorer. He was an all-around forward that really was the heart and soul of a line they called the crash line when they did the trap. This line could just mother teams unbelievable. They were the main focus of why this team won Stanley Cups. The next forward I'm going to go with is Patrick Elliott. He played for the Devils from 1995 to 2016, and he scored a total of 1,025 points. He was a highly productive, dominating winger that helped lead him to a couple of cups in the 90s. The last forward, I just always liked this guy, Zach Parise. He just was a very creative, gifted forward. He played for the Devils from 2005 to 2012. So that's my all-time Devils forwards. Now let's look at the defensemen. Okay, my next one for the blue line, obvious choice, Scott Stevens. He played for the Devils from 1991 to 2004. He won a couple cups with the New Jersey Devils. He was also the anchor on their trap, the fundamental defensive system they used to win those multiple cups. But this guy, his bread and butter was hitting. This guy hit like a Mack truck. During the playoffs, you better keep your head up. Remember, he's the one that took out Eric Lindros and Paul Kariya in two different playoff years with his brute power and strength. He gave both of those serious concussions. You could even argue that the concussion that he gave Eric Lindros was a career-ending concussion. Now, the other guy on the other side, I'm going to go with totally the opposite type of a guy. Scott Niedermayer. He was a pure offensive defenseman. His skating was unbelievable. It almost looked effortless when he skated. He was one that ran the power play in order to get those couple cups the Devils got in the 90s. He really pushed the offense to get them the chance to win those cups. He played for the Devils from 91 to 2004. Okay, my next one is going to be for the goaltender. Obvious choice, Martin Brodeur, one of the top winningest goaltenders in NHL history, has won several cups. Played for the Devils from 1991 to 2014. He won 5 Vezinas and a Calder Cup. Vezinas are for Goaltender of the Year. Calder Cup is for the Rookie of the Year. He was also introduced in the Hockey Hall of Fame in 2018. That's my New Jersey Devils all-time team. Now let's look at the next team, which is the New York Islanders, which dominated the NHL back in the 1980s. So let's look at the top 3 forwards I think are on my all-time Islanders team. First person I'm going to go with, Mike Bossy. He played for the Islanders from 1977 to 1987. For those 10 years, though, he was one of the NHL's pure top scorers in the league. One of my favorite NHL stories actually came from Mike Bossy. When he was actually negotiating his first contract in the league, they were actually lowballing him. And he told his agent, how much is a 50-goal scorer worth? And, of course, the hockey operations of the New York Islanders at the time said, well, why don't you first make the team before you decide how many goals you're going to score in the NHL? I just love that. He was so, it wasn't an egotistical approach. He was just overly confident that he could produce in the NHL. He didn't have an ego problem. He was just really, really good, and he knew it. He ended up scoring for his career was 572 goals. He had 553 assists for a total of 1,126 points in his 10-year career. And he got his name put on the Stanley Cup 4 times in those 10 years. Now, of course, if I have him, I'm going to have his setup guy, Brian Trottier. He was a playmaking center iceman with great vision and soft hands who played for the Islanders from 1975 to 1994. He also won 4 cups in that time frame. He also was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1997. Now, if you listen to my podcast for a while, you know I always love those two-way forwards. And Clark Gilly is a typical two-way forward. He could play offense, defense, but he also didn't mind dropping the gloves and fighting. And he's totally willing to play along the boards and win those 50-50 puck battles. He was just a great utility forward for this team that actually won 4 Stanley Cups. He played for the Islanders from 1974 to 1986. So let's look at the defense, the Blue Liners, for my all-time Islanders team. Of course, now let's look at the Blue Liners. Of course, I have to go with the guy that anchored the Blue Line for those 4 cup-running teams, the number 1 defenseman, Dennis Potvin. He played for the Islanders from 1973 to 1988, and he got 310 goals, 742 assists, 1,052 total points. He was the top defenseman in the league 4 times and got the Norris Trophy. And he also won 4 Stanley Cups. And he also was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1991. I'm going to go with Kenny Janssen as my other one. He was a big, strong defenseman during the not-so-great years of the New York Islanders. And he also was a captain of the New York Islanders during that time frame and really led the Islanders. He played for the Islanders 1996 to 2004. For goaltender, I'm going to go with Billy Smith. I think that's a good goaltender to go with. He won 4 cups. He was a really aggressive goaltender that didn't mind whacking a few forwards with his stick to make sure he got his crease cleared out. He wasn't a dominating goaltender, but he got the job done, and he actually anchored that team to 4 Stanley Cups. He never gave up the bad goal at the bad time. He made the big save when he needed to do it. The next team I'm going to talk about is the New York Rangers. First person I'm going to talk about is Bill Cook. He played for the Rangers from 1926 to 1937. He scored a total of 367 points. He was a power forward back in the early days of the NHL. He also was the team captain for about 10 years. He was the gritty veteran leader that led the New York Rangers to their first Stanley Cup. And it reminds me of the next person I'm going to talk about, Mark Messier, because he was kind of like in the same mold as Messier was as a New York Rangers captain that led the Rangers to another Stanley Cup in 1994. He had 2 stints with the New York Rangers. The first one was from 1991 to 1997. Then he played again for them from 2000 to 2004. He scored 169 points for the New York Rangers. Of course, his most memorable situation was in Game 6 of the 1994 playoffs Eastern Conference Finals when he guaranteed a win over the arch-rival New Jersey Devils to lead them to the Stanley Cup Finals, which they ended up gradually winning that Stanley Cup in 1994. The other form I pick, Samika Avanadjet. I picked him because he drives the play. He plays in front of the net. He plays along the boards. He's unbelievable at face-offs. He's an all-around, high-end forward, similar to what the other 2 guys that I picked for the top 3 all-time forwards for the New York Rangers. I think he perfectly fits in with the other 2 guys. He's played for the Rangers now going on 8 years, and I don't see any slowing down. Of course, now let's look at the blue line. Now, the first one's an obvious one, Brian Leetch. I mean, he's an all-around defenseman, smooth skating. Doesn't look like he's even trying when he skates at full speed. He's got an unbelievable shot. For hardware, he actually won a Calder. He won 2 Norris trophies as best defenseman of the year. He also won a Stanley Cup. He was the anchor on that blue line, that 94 team. The other person I'm going to go with is pretty obvious, Brad Park. He played for the Rangers from 1968 to 1975. He was actually a Rangers draft pick. He was a a really unbelievable offensive defenseman. Some people feel that he was just a step below Bobby Orr with skill value. Now let's talk about goal. Now I had a really hard time with this one. I was going Lundqvist or Richter, back and forth, back and forth. Finally, I landed on Lundqvist, simply because of his pure skill, quickness, and capability of stopping the puck. Unfortunately, he never won a Stanley Cup, but his goals against average was 2.32, and his save percentage is .92. Even though Richter did win a cup for the Rangers in '94, I still think Lundqvist over the career was much more of a reliable goaltender. That's my all-time list for the Rangers. Now, like I said, if you have any problems with this list, I have a YouTube channel, and under this channel, you can make comments. Feel free to make a comment about any of these lists I'm making. Now, the next thing I'm going to look at is the Ottawa Senators, their all-time list. It's had some pretty interesting players on their list. First one is Daniel Alfredsson, obvious choice. He played for the Senators from 1995 to 2013. He scored 426 goals, 882 assists, for a total of 1,108 points. What was impressive about him, though, was he was an all-around, high-end skilled forward. The next person I'm going to go with is Jason Spezza. He played for the Senators from 2002 to 2014. He scored a total of 687 points as an Ottawa Senator. He was, I felt, is the most gifted the Ottawa Senators have ever had. Now, the last forward is one of the new Ottawa Senators, Brady Tkachuk. He's played 6 years in the league, and he scored already 138 goals. He got 156 assists for 294 points. And he's the heart and soul of this team. He can do everything you want him to do. That's my all-time Ottawa Senators forwards. So now let's look at the blue line. The first one's another obvious blue liner, Erik Karlsson. He can do everything. He's a number one defenseman. Can play a complete game in all three zones. He's an incredible defenseman. That's all I can really say there. The other guy I'm going to go with is Wade Redden. He played for the Ottawa Senators from 1996 to 2008. He anchored the blue line during that time frame. He also scored 410 points during that time frame. He was another all-around defenseman that would go ideal with Karlsson. Now, this was a tough one, too. I had to go with the goaltenders, and I went with Craig Anderson. I mean, he's right now, I think, the best example of a steady goaltender as they've ever had in Ottawa. I mean, he's not great, but he doesn't give up bad goals at bad times. The next team I'm going to look at is the Philadelphia Flyers, one of the most intimidating teams in the NHL back in the 1970s. I'm going to look at their all-star, all-franchise team. First, let's start with the forwards. First one's going to be Bobby Clarke. He was the captain of the Flyers back when they won all those Stanley Cups back in the 1970s. He played for the Flyers from 1969 to 1984, and he racked up 1,280 points during that time span. He was the emotional leader of those rough-and-tumble Philadelphia Flyers teams. The next person I'm going to put on my all-time Flyers list, unfortunately, had his career shortened because of concussions. That's Eric Lindros. This guy was just a unbelievable, strong, big center iceman that drove the Legion of Doom line back in the 90s. He could do anything. He could play in front of the net. He could shoot it from a point. He could pick it off the boards. He could win those key face-offs. But unfortunately, he never learned to keep his head up going through the neutral zone and the attacking zone. The last one I'm going to pick for the all-time team, Claude Giroux. Now, he wasn't the most gifted scorer out there. He wasn't the biggest guy out there, but he really drove the play and made clutch goals and unbelievable passes when the Flyers needed him, when he played for them. First person I'm going to put on the blue line is Mark Howe, son of Gordie Howe, but that's not why I'm putting him on the blue line, just because he's Gordie Howe's son. Mark Howe really solidified the blue line back when he played in the 1982 to 1992. He was a solid top pairing defenseman. The other one's going to be Eric Desjardins. This guy was an unbelievably solid shutdown defenseman that could tip in a goal here and there for you. But his defensive work when he was playing was unbelievable. He played for the Flyers from 1995 to 2006. Of course, at goal, you got to go with Bernie Perrant, the Hall of Fame goaltender, multiple Stanley Cups. He was just an unbelievable goaltender back when he was playing for the Flyers. That was a look at the Philadelphia Flyers all-time team. Now I'm going to look at the Pittsburgh Penguins all-time, all-franchise team. Let's look at the forwards first. First one I'm going to look at is Mario Lemieux. He was an unbelievably gifted player. For the time he played for the Penguins, he scored 1,033 points. He played from 1984 to 2006. But he did have a situation in the middle of that time frame where he had some serious medical issues. He had cancer that left him out for a few seasons. But he came back even stronger. The next one is obviously a no-brainer, Sidney Crosby. He's got multiple Stanley Cups. And even in his older years, he's still a legitimate threat to win another cup and also legitimate threat to getting another scoring title. He's an elite superstar center iceman. I'm also going to add Malkin into this because he also has won Stanley Cups at the same time Crosby has been playing, and he is still a legitimate superstar center iceman. So I have to put him on this all-franchise, all-time list for the Penguins. Now let's look at the blue line. On the blue line, first round pick is Paul Coffey. He was an offensive-minded defenseman that played for the Penguins from 1987 to 1992. He was a smooth skating, and he had one heck of a little wrist shot that was lethal. The other defenseman I'm going to go with Kevin Stevens. He played for the Penguins from 1987 to 2001. He was the number one defensive defenseman. He could anchor your blue line, and when you put him on penalty kill, he shut teams down every time. He was really great on penalty kill. At goal, I'm going to go with Marc-Andre Fleury. He's won a Stanley Cup, but he's a solid, consistent goaltender that doesn't give up bad goals. So I'm definitely going to put him on this all-time Penguins all-franchise list at goal. Now let's look at the next team, which is now going to be Tampa Bay Lightning. We're looking at their all-time all-franchise list. First one I'm going to go with Martin St. Louis. He was a forward for the Lightning from 2000 to 2014. He scored a total of 953 points. What made him so special was his size. He was a little guy at an era where little guys didn't really do a whole lot because of the clutching and grabbing and the holding that was taking place back in the 2000s. But he was still always at the top of the scoring leaders, going for an MVP. And he did win a championship back in 2004, along with his teammate Vinny Lecavalier. This was a high draft pick center iceman that really led the team through a very tough time when clutching and grabbing and holding took place. The Lightning at that time were a high-scoring, high-pressure team, and Lecavalier and Marty St. Louis really set the standard for that. The other person I'm going to go is Steven Stamkos. He's another high-end draft pick that really led the Bolts to multiple Stanley Cups. He actually is a team leader that's making this team into a dynasty team. He came on board in 2008 until present time. Now on the blue line, I'm going to go with Victor Hedman as my first blue line choice for the all-time, all-franchise team for the Tampa Bay Lightning. He's been on this team since 2009 till present time. He's won multiple Stanley Cups with him being the anchor on this blue line, the number one defenseman. He can run the power play. He can run the penalty kill. He's just an all-around stud defenseman. The other one I'm going to go with Pavel Kabina. He basically anchored this blue line from 1998 to 2012. He had 2 stints with the Lightning during that time frame. But he was a top pairing defenseman during that time frame. Of course, the goaltending I'm going to pick for the all-time Tampa Bay all-franchise list is going to be Vasilevsky. He's the best goaltender they've ever had. He's made this team into a dynasty team by backstopping this team to, 3 or 4 Stanley Cups? That's unbelievable how great this guy is. Now, the next team we'll look at is another original 6 team, the Toronto Maple Leafs. The first forward I want on the all-time team is Sil Apps. He played for the Leafs from 1936 to 1948. He was originally the first superstar the Maple Leafs had. And even with those old skates they had in the 1930s, he was a fluid skater. It was unbelievable if you watch him skate, how well he can skate in those big clunky skates they had back then. Next one I'm going to go with Matt Sundin. He was an all-around, high-end center iceman that's actually on top of a lot of the Leafs' points, goals, and assists records for all time played. He played for the Leafs from 1994 to 2008. He was a true leader on some really good teams. Unfortunately, they weren't great and they never won any cups. But I'm still putting him on this all-time, all-franchise list because of what he did contribute to the Leafs franchise. The next one I'm going to go with, final forward for this all-time team, is Austin Matthews. He's kind of like right now in the same situation as Matt Sundin is. He's an unbelievable scorer, a real leader on this franchise, but they've yet to win any cups with him as the true leader of this team. Now let's talk about the blue line. Now, the first person I'm going to go with, not because he makes great hot chocolate and donuts. I mean, I'm addicted to Timbits. I'm going to go with him because he's the most complete defenseman ever played in the NHL. Of course, I'm talking about Tim Horton. He played for the Leafs from 1949 to 1970, and he was just, he could do everything. He didn't have a mean bone in his body. He was the most gentleman hockey player that ever played. The next one I'm going to go with is King Clancy. He played for the Leafs from 1930 to 1936. He managed to win a couple cups with the Leafs during that time frame. For that time frame, he was an elite defensive defenseman. For goal, obviously, I'm going to go with Johnny Bauer. He was the backbone of those Leafs dynasty in the 1960s. They got 4 cups for those Leafs. He played for the Leafs from 1958 to 1969. So let's look at the last team in the Eastern Conference, the Washington Capitals. Okay, the first person, if I'm going to go with a all-time, all-franchise list, you have to go with Alexander Ovechkin as the first person on that list for the forwards. I mean, he's just a elite superstar franchise sniper in the history of the NHL. I mean, he's on the verge of breaking the great one, Wayne Gretzky's all-time goals record. So, I mean, you have to have him on this list. The next person I'm going to pick for his all-time franchise team, I'm going to go with Peter Bondra. Now, he played during the dead puck era, which was really hard to score back then. He still managed to fill the net up with pucks with ease. He played for the Capitals from 1990 to 2004, and he scored 825 points. And the last guy I'm going to pick on this all-forward team, all-time team, is Nicholas Backstrom. He's the one that did the setup for Ovi all these years. He laid down the sauce so Ovi could turn on the red light. For the blue line, for the all-time, all-franchise team, I'm going to go with Scott Stevens. He played for the Caps from 1982 to 1990, one of the most feared open ice hitters ever played this game. Then the other one I'm going to go with is John Carlson. He really anchored that blue line for the cup-winning team. He's an elite-level, two-way defenseman. Now let's look at goaltending. Now, goaltending was tough for me because there was 2 guys I was going back and forth with. But I'm going to go with the guy that backstopped him to a Stanley Cup, which this whole entire thing, I think, is the ultimate thing is, did they win a Stanley Cup with this franchise? And he did. Of course, I'm talking about Braden Holtby. During his career, he wasn't a high-end goaltending at all times, but when it counted during the playoffs, he became an elite goaltender. So that's my all-franchise Eastern Conference teams. Now, if you want to, you can always comment below on my YouTube channel and tell me what you think. Thanks for listening.